Welcome to the Boundless Bible. My name is David Shapiro.
Hey, I'm Javi Marquez.
And I'm Jason Holloway.
Welcome back, everyone. How's it going?
All good.
What's up?
I'm glad everyone's back with us today. We're going to be talking about an interesting character today, a character by the name of Paul. And when I start with Paul, this is somebody who I always looked at as he's very harsh. He has very strong opinions, especially on social issues. But one of the things I look at is, let's say you're sitting at church right now, and as you're sitting there, this person comes in and sits next to you, and you realize this is a person who has killed all of your family and friends, and they're sitting next to you, and how would you feel? And then all of a sudden they get up and they get behind the pulpit and they start preaching.
Wow.
I mean, this is something where you would look at and you go, how can I listen to this person? I absolutely despise what this person stands for, what's about to do. And now let me rewind and tell you that this is Paul. And let me give you some brief overview on Paul before we go into today.
Yeah, please.
Paul was a Pharisee. He was studied.
Yeah.
And he absolutely hated followers of Christ. He persecuted them. He killed them. He was there when they were stoning people.
Yeah.
He was the reason why so many people were killed by the faith of Christ.
Yep.
The beginning.
In the beginning.
Beginnings of it. Yeah.
Well, in the beginnings after the resurrection.
After
right?
the resurrection, correct.
That's a better way to say it. Yeah.
So this is somebody who was a Jewish scholar who wanted to kill anybody who followed Christ, and that was his mission.
Yeah.
His mission was literally to go around to find these followers.
He was
very good at it.
And he was good at it.
So you have this guy who, has this experience, and then on the road to Damascus, bang.
Yeah.
God comes down. And before we go into kind of what happened, I look at the grace of God and I'm going, this is somebody who is killing all of his believers.
Right.
And he's saying, yep, you're the one. You're the guy who I'm going to use to write most of the New Testament, to become one of the biggest evangelists ever in the history of Christianity, maybe the biggest.
Yeah.
Like, you're the guy.
Yeah.
Man, the grace of God for me to ever feel like I wasn't good enough.
Yeah. Well, for context on that, it was a bright light, and with that, he lost sight. And God didn't tell him right away that he's going to be this writer for the New Testament and all that stuff and do amazing things that he did. But in time, he was revealed that, or in time that it just happens to be that way. But he did say, hey, why are you persecuting me?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you going against my people? Why are you killing them? Yeah. And it's amazing that he used that guy. And I think I know why.
Well, you mentioned blindness.
Yep.
He was blind for 3 days.
For 3 days.
He was
blind for 3 days.
Interesting amount of days.
I think he was blind for his whole life.
Ooh.
Oh, okay.
I agree.
I mean, this was him restoring his sight because he was blind to Jesus his whole life. So I think he was
guy.
No, I agree. I mean, I think blindness has a lot of that symbolism in the Bible, right? I think most of the times that Jesus heals a blind person, I found it recently. I thought it was interesting that he didn't heal a blind person the same way twice. Okay. So in every case, he healed them differently. Which, again, if you're speaking to like the symbolism of being blind, meaning you're not seeing in front of you, each person who's not seeing probably doesn't see for a different reason, and they probably need their own way out of that loss of the lack of sight. In Paul's case, however, he needed some blinding so he could be real clear that you need to get your sight back, son.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he needed something so drastic like that to understand that this is coming from God, and he had to humble him down a little bit, and he had to bring, set him straight.
And talking about humbleness, I mean, first off, a lot of people think that, like Abraham, his name was changed by God, that God changed his name from Saul to Paul. It's actually not true.
That's not
Paul
true.
changed his own name.
He did.
Oh, did he? I didn't know that.
He did. So
he did.
Saul means prayed for. Paul means little. He actually changed his name to sound smaller than God, but also it would be a more Gentile sounding name. Yeah. So he can go and preach to the Gentiles.
And that's what I researched on that. Just to because some people will probably say he changed his own name and he changed his name from Saul Paul rather than Jesus and everybody else, like Jesus and God. Changes people's names. Where for him, he did change his name to bring it down to little little Saul, but also for that reason to like blend in that sense.
And you're talking about, somebody who's being knocked down, humility and humble. And so he had to knock down his name. He got knocked down a bunch. And now he is going to go and preach to people he was persecuting.
Right.
I can't even imagine what that would be like for him.
Let's go back for a second, because I'm sitting here reading as you're talking about it, and he gets up to the ground, and even though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they took him by the hand and led him into Damascus.
Right.
He was unable to see for 3 days and did not eat or drink. So not only did he have his sight taken away, but he had his ability to eat and drink taken away as well, it seems. Mm-hmm. And or is that a reference to fasting? Probably a reference to fasting, right? And then it says there was a disciple in Damascus named Ananias, and the Lord said to him in a vision, Ananias.
Ananias.
Hey, I like Ananias.
I like that.
It's like anonymous,
What's up, girl?
But what up, Anonymous? So he gets told to go to meet him and to take care of him there. And again, this is what you're saying about, and I love this story too, because Ananias knows who he is, and he's now being told, just like Jonah was told to go, preach to these people in Nineveh. Ananias has to be saying, I don't want to do that.
I believe so. Yeah. I believe that he didn't want to go over there and do the will of God. And knowing, not only that, he probably was scared that
that's not a
Paul
bad
was going to probably get up and, start, hitting him over the head with some stones or something,
Of course. Well, that's the rest of his story are going to be who's going to trust this man.
Right.
You were just killing all of my friends and family. Like I said, in that church, who's going to sit next to him? Who's going to say, yeah, come over here and tell me about this? Man, what a way to humble him. And one of the things I love about Paul that he does is he acts in obedience, not in agreement. Right. This is somebody who does not agree. And I'll tell you the subtle difference between obedience and agreement.
Yes, please do.
If I have my kids and I'm talking to them and I want them to be obedient, I say, hey, go do this. And they go and do it, they're being obedient. Yeah. If they go, why, and I explain it to them, and then they go do it, they're agreeing with what I am telling them to do. So they're acting in agreement. So it's not just, hey, go and do this. Well, why do I have to? So that way this can happen. Okay, no, this is go do this.
Because I told you to.
Because I told you to. Yeah. And then he's acting in full obedience going, I am persecuting all of the Jesus followers. And now I'm being told to do something different. And man, I mean, again, we're being told now you're going to go and actually be really nice to all of them. You're going to be one of them. You're going to be the prime person.
Yeah.
I mean, man, you want to talk about humility. I don't even know what that would feel like to him or to the other people.
Yeah, seriously. And not only that, I think it took him a couple years to like.
That was one of the things that I was going to bring up. Yeah. Galatians, it actually tells his story, right? It tells the fact that he was like, I think he says he went off by himself into the desert or something for like 3 years. And then he goes to, I think it's Damascus, where he meets the other disciples who are basically like, nuh-uh.
Yeah.
And he has to prove himself.
Yep.
And, I mean, like it's a really cool story all around. I also think it's important to note that like he wrote most of the New Testament, 13, right. Some people say 14 books, right?
Yeah.
Hebrews is the one that's kind of contested.
Yes.
But he's not the one who wrote his story in Acts. His story of his conversion happens in Acts, which was written by Luke.
Right.
And, I think that's an important story. It's not that like when you start looking at Paul and you go, oh, Paul is the most of the New Testament. Paul is like verified by, Paul's story, but before Paul has anything to say, is verified by Luke. And quite a few times, in fact, is verified by the disciples themselves, having met him and spent time with him. So that gives him that level of credibility back. So it's not like he just, was this like rogue follower who had these cool ideas and people were like, oh, that's cool. I'm in, he got
beard.
He got official, right?
Yeah.
Very nice beard. Yeah. He was officially welcomed and approved by those disciples. And I think that's an important
distinction.
Note.
Yeah. I think it's a very important distinction to know that they did approve of him. And it was the same teachings that he was saying that the Peter and James was teaching at the time.
Yep. And also, listen, when you look at it historically, it's also important because people who say, hey, who's this Paul? He didn't walk with Jesus. Mm-hmm. How could he possibly talk in his way? And how could he know these things? Yeah. He did spend time with the apostles, which did make him now eligible to speak and become canon. So that's an important thing as well, that he spent time with the apostles. Yeah. He wasn't just somebody who had this conversion story. But kind of getting back to God really quick, just to touch on this subject of the grace of God. I think about some of the things I've done wrong in my life, and I feel unworthy for certain things. There are times where I feel unworthy to be somebody who's talking to somebody else about God, knowing my own backstory and saying, I was a Jew turned into an atheist. How could I possibly speak about, God? And then I look at Paul and I go, God's grace, it goes beyond any of my ability to comprehend. But what a blessing for all of us to realize that somebody like Paul.
And to be honest, that's why I love Paul so much. To me, I probably would not be well received into receiving Christ or even getting the word to me if it wasn't for Paul. For Gentiles like myself, I'm not Jewish. I didn't grow up in a Jewish home or even know Jewish culture. So to have that, to me, Paul is a staple for a lot of us and how he spread the word to the Gentiles.
Yeah, and I think, look, you're talking, David, I think what you said is so important. He took this wildly unworthy person and made him the most worthy, which is a lesson that we all need to learn about the nature of God.
Yep.
God is not looking for perfect people. God is looking for people. In fact, a little trauma is probably connecting you with other people. That amount of pain that you've gone through allows you to see what it's like for other people, to relate to those people, but also for other people to see that you can overcome those things. And I would even take it a step further and say, what's the line? I always forget the line in the Bible that says he will use all things for good.
Yeah, for sure.
One of those things.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is one of those perfect situations where he takes all the bad that Paul has done and turns it into the complete opposite, which is humility, which is
perfect
seeing love for others. Where he used to hate, he loves.
Right.
Where he used to condemn, he submits to.
And I think Paul was a great like him picking Paul was perfect. Paul was this scholarly Pharisee that knows the Old Testament, knows the laws there, right?
That's a great point.
He's also a Roman citizen.
Yeah.
Right. So he's able to get to certain circles and get to certain places being a Roman and having this citizenship. He's a person that's gonna go to all length to persecute, right? He did that, but also spread.
Well,
he spread the gospel, and
totally.
He's willing to do all these things. We see him; he gets shipwrecked. He spread it out all throughout Asia Minor and going into Greece and all that stuff. So,
and maybe even Spain.
And
yeah. But I mean,
Spain.
Look at this. I love the fact that he's a ex-Pharisee, because who of all people could have taken the Old Testament knowledge and prophecies and been able to speak to them in the New Testament language and say what it meant was this, what they said was this, what it means is this. So he was able to translate all of the Old Testament into what would become the New Testament. What was the new covenant? What was the new teachings of Jesus? And nobody else could have done that.
Yeah. And going back to what I said before about Paul spreading out the gospel, which you'll probably get to, David, I think for me, Paul was there from the beginning. When he was there persecuting the Christians, and he was there when he was a part of killing Steve, one of the first martyrs, or the first martyr.
Stephen,
sorry. Yeah, Steve. Sorry, I always shortened it. So
first name.
Yeah, Steve. What's up, Steve? And they scattered, it says in Acts 8:4.
Yeah, that's right.
They killed him, and then they scattered. He was there from the beginning. And then on top of that, he took that after his conversion and took it and went further.
Yeah. Jason, just so you know, Genesis 50:20 is, as for you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good.
Yeah.
That's good.
So that's that quote that you were looking at. But for looking at Paul, one of the things that happens, and this is the relationship part, because we always look at it as, hey, listen, God is telling you to do something, and we either do it or don't do it, and that's it. And if we don't do it, God's going to make you do it. And, Moses had a stutter and didn't want to do it. And God was like, no, you're doing it. And Jonah, I'm putting you in a fish. But most of the time, God is giving us this free will. And he's saying, hey, I want you to do this. And Paul could have very easily
said no.
Was absolutely not. Yeah. I'm blind for 3 days. So what? I don't care. I'm persecuting you. Absolutely. Because I believe this wholeheartedly as a Pharisee, that this is against what I believe.
Right.
So I love the fact that God has this amazing grace that I could not possibly understand, but Paul has this conviction afterwards where I think about it and I go, I've talked about this before. I love God. Would I be able to be a martyr? Would I be able to be in a situation where somebody will kill me, imprison me? I am lucky enough to grow up and live in the United States where that's not a fear. But this is somebody now who has to go, you want to talk about humility?
Yeah.
I killed you and, and I didn't kill you. You wouldn't be here. I killed your entire family and friends. And now I have to come to you in humbleness and talk to you about Christ after just killing your family for the belief in Christ. Man, Paul also had to show a whole lot of. So now when I look at the mistake I made with him being this harsh, strong opinion guy.
Well, he is, though. Let's be clear.
He is, but I can give him some reprieve and go, man, this was a really harsh situation that he was put in.
For sure.
That he had to agree with. And he's now balancing, this is my old perception of the Old Testament, but this is my new perception of Jesus Christ and spending time alone with him and spending time with the disciples. Man, this is what a transformation.
Well, also, look, to his credit, he is a human who now has the first of many churches to oversee. And we talk often in this podcast about how humans are. So it wasn't like he walked in and was like, Jesus is Lord. And they were like, oh, yeah. And then everything was good. No, they screwed up over and over and over, and they screwed up more. And can you imagine, we look at 13 stories of this, but it wasn't 13 stories. It was probably 130 stories, 260 stories. And so at some point he's going to be like, all right, laying the hammer down. I'm going to put it to you hard, and I'm going to make sure you get this. And so, he's harsh. He's very harsh in some cases. And he's harsh because the world has been harsh on him, and because he's noticing that just telling people, hey guys, probably shouldn't do that, isn't working.
Yeah.
You know?
I tell people all the time, this is my little joke, but I always say there's a reason I'm not rich. Because if I was rich, I would have spent $1 million at McDonald's and I'd be 900 pounds. Because I don't have the restraint, because I've never had money that way. Yeah. I don't have that restraint. And I say that only because, it's very hard to be different than who you are all of a sudden. And this is now somebody who, if one day I blinked and boom, you're now God's spoken person on earth. My personality and who I am, who knows what would come out of my mouth towards people. I have no idea.
And I might get in trouble for this too, but I was reading in Galatians, and one of the things that he's pretty clear on in Galatians that surprised me, I didn't catch this the first 2 times around. Yeah. He is condemning Simon Peter and some of the original disciples in Galatians, because they have stopped living by what Christ lived by and started living by the old ways again. So I say this not to negate the importance of those disciples, but to say that at least from Paul, what we know historically of Paul having something to say about this, he now feels like he's the one and only. Like, these guys who were with Christ are now won't feed with Gentiles. They won't eat with Gentiles. That's one of the things he says they won't do. Yeah. And, so now he feels his divine calling even more, which, by the way, is consistent with his character, right? He was already somebody who cared about the Jewish writings because he was a Pharisee and he did this studying. He was already a devoted person to a religion. So for him to newly devote to the new religion is not out of character at all. And so, to already feel like the weight of the world on you, only to find out that 3 of the people who literally trained you, and I think it even says 14 years, if I'm not mistaken, it says 14 years later, I go back to see how they're doing, see if I've been teaching in the wrong way, and they're not even following it. So again, got to give, Paul a little bit of love there, that he's still trying to stick to what he believed in, even though others.
Yeah. I like to think of it of,
who brought him up.
God used him to preach to the Gentiles, and God used, James and Peter to preach to the Jews that was converting to, Christianity.
Well, I think we also talked about the fact that, yes, harsh and he's got some opinions. But one of the things we talked about is, he's also the lesser of 2 evils. Well, what if God did not produce somebody like a Paul and it was just, hey, you're going to have the Old Testament and some people talking about the New Testament and Paul writing the majority of the New Testament, there would have been a whole bunch of different doctrines and things written, and who knows how it would have turned out. God put somebody who needed to be this forceful, possibly in there for a reason.
Right. Yeah, because he said, take this gospel, the Great Commission, right? Go out and spread the gospel. You guys are not doing that.
Yeah, that's fair.
Let me get this guy, Paul.
Yeah, you guys are hanging out in Jerusalem over here, and I'm out in, Greece and in Mykonos.
No, I'm talking about
I'm
Paul's
in
conversion.
Ibiza.
Like,
I'm in Ibiza telling these people how to live, and
I'm
you
talking
all
about
are.
Paul's conversion.
I know.
Like,
Yeah.
dude, you guys are getting persecuted. You're trying to spread the gospel. You're trying to do your best where you can. And God said, all right, this is enough. I got to use this guy. Boom.
Yeah.
You know, I could be totally off here, but like, to me, there is something there to say he used Paul at a time that maybe the original apostles were not doing what maybe he really called.
Well, they
them to.
needed somebody harsh who's in your face. Listen, just kind of bringing it to a parental figure. You have one parent who is going to be the nice, loving, I don't want to reprimand my kid's parent.
Right. That's true.
And then you have the other parent comes in and says, no, I want them to grow up the right way. I'm going to be the one who's going to discipline them.
They take off the chancla and somebody.
And you have that disciplinarian.
Chancla,
so when you have that, you're like, thank God for the disciplinarian, because my kids grew up knowing right from wrong, versus the one who is like, no, well, just, this is fine. It's just a piece of chocolate. You have 3 more.
Yeah.
So I think this is exactly who needed to be there to spread Christianity around the world.
Yeah. And he is also very consistent in his writings, which I think is important, because it's not like, I think there's some things that he says that rub people the wrong way, and a lot of things that have been taken out of context, and
for sure,
there's a lot of those things with him, but I think it's still important to note that at least he's being consistent, and he's able to help a church be built, a church family be built off of at least a clear, consistent set of guidelines, and there's something to that as well.
Yeah.
And when we say, things like, hey, Paul is saying things that,
just tough to hear. I like
just tough to hear.
Yeah.
This is something that I believe one of the reasons we have the Bible that we have today is because God wanted it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if he wanted pages to be different, if he wanted something not to be there, he would have arranged that to have happened. This is his word.
Yeah.
And I think that we have what we have today for a reason.
Yeah. Agreed.
I respect that. I believe that.
Yeah. I mean, look, we wouldn't have the church we have today without him. We wouldn't. We would have, if we only had, I mean, I almost want to read through the whole New Testament minus Paul, just to see what it reads like, just to see what it would have been like. You know what I mean? Yeah. Well, just right now.
You guys got,
you got a minute?
Got time?
You got a minute?
Okay.
Yeah. Just to see what it would have been like. But I, from what I do know, I mean, he laid the foundation for rules within the church, not necessarily for how to be Christ-like, but how to run a church.
I have a verse for you guys. Let me see. 1 Corinthians 15:8-10. This is Paul writing to the Corinthians. At last, of all he appeared to me also, as to one abnormally born, for I am the least of the apostles, and do not even deserve to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God, but by the grace of God I am what I am. And his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me. I like the fact that Paul admits that he is not greater. He is lesser than the apostles. He knows his stance of where he's at in the kingdom of God. And he's just trying to do his best to do what God called him to be. Yeah. And that's why I really respect him for the great length. You know?
And listen, I'm definitely not going to compare myself with Paul, but much the same, I was born Jewish. I spent a lot of my life either Jewish or atheist. So when I became a Christian, I met so many people that have spent, their entire lives at church, 40, 50 years in church. And I had to do a lot of studying to quote unquote catch up. And I felt like, well, I need to work harder. I haven't been here for 40 years, for 50 years. So I need to work harder to be able to hold my own in these conversations. So I do understand what he's saying, where it's, hey, listen, I might not be this 40-year, 50-year Christian.
Yeah.
But maturity doesn't always come with age. Sometimes it comes with wisdom and knowledge.
Yeah.
And that was where I was, again, that reads true to where I was in my life.
Yeah, I love that. And the other thing, that's a good one. I mean, it's really important that he made himself feel worthy by his devotion. And that's what we should do as Christians, right? Whether you're 40-year, 50-year, or brand new, we're never going to be worthy, but the most that we can show that we're worthy is by giving our all as much as we can to try and catch up to wherever we believe we should be. So the other thing that I really love about Paul, though, and I think this is, not only did he help us set the guidelines and foundation for how to build a church and how to manage a church and manage the people of a church, but he also he didn't do it at one church. And I think we can't forget that, right? I already mentioned it could have been 130 or 260 or whatever, but he is the reason it spread. He is the one who really seems to have managed the growth of the early church and to make sure that it is what we have today. And for that, I'm ever grateful. And I think that that's the lesson that we should take away just as much as we're not worthy and then God uses unworthy people, is the fact that this is what we should be doing.
Right.
This is what we should be doing. Discipling the people, evangelizing to people, telling them about our hurt, our suffering, our humility, and God's love.
You're right. To be just like Paul. And I think for me, Paul was not afraid to share this good news. And that's what he did. And for us, I think we shouldn't be afraid to share this good news. It's not ours anyway. So it's for us to give it away. So just give it away.
That's good.
Yep. Well, listen, the Great Commission was to go out and make disciples of all nations.
Right.
And that's the specific part where it's very easy for us to kind of fall into our own people group, our own families, to go, hey, I'm talking to this person or that person who I know who is very similar and like-minded as me. But, God didn't say, Jesus did not come down and say, hey, make disciples of the friends or neighbors next to you.
Good.
It was go out of all people, all nations. So when we're called, it is, listen, I'm going to go and talk to everybody and anybody and everybody about Jesus Christ and what he did for us. And I think that Great Commission really was attacked perfectly by Paul. I think if we look at it, like that's our mission is whether you're going to be a missionary, whether you're going to be a podcaster, whether you're going to be somebody who's going to go out there and go, I'm just not talking to my people group. I'm going to talk to everybody about Jesus.
And use what God made, use your testimony. That's what I think Paul had a great testimony, which is why.
Well, he had a terrible testimony, but that's why it was good.
No,
right?
but his divine encounter, maybe struck a chord with somebody, and he just shared that, and he shared the goodness of God, and he shared, of course, to repent and our flawed nature and stuff. So I think Paul used what he had, and I think we all could use our testimony to share the gospel.
To that point, think about it. Who could possibly look at Paul after Paul's terrible story and conversion and say, well, no, my story is worse than that.
Right.
Right? Think about that. Nobody could. Like, he had to be.
Too.
Right. Like, he probably does.
He's so humble, but not.
I was going to say, Paul's the most humble person, though. I love it. It's fun to watch. So, but I mean, think about it. Can you imagine him going to somebody and them going, I can't do this because of that? And he's like, you know what I used to do?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge thing. Like, all of a sudden, he's one-upping everybody. Like, there's nobody who can beat that. There's nobody who can beat that. Like, somebody's going to be like a Roman gladiator and be like, I killed all kinds of people. It's like, wait, do you see what I did? Like, me too, except I did it against their God. So come on over. You know what I mean? Wow. Like, it's cool. Like, it's crazy how that kind of thing works, but like, that's the kind of thing that God does.
That's beautiful.
And the bravery that he had to do it. And that's what I'm saying. For us, we're here today going, totally. Have some bravery and go talk to somebody about it.
Yeah, go talk to the person at Publix and you're like, hold on, I don't know. She might not like that.
Meanwhile, here's Paul with his story. I'm going, man, what bravery.
When he often says that he was like beaten brutally, right? Like to the point where like he was like medically infirm because of like the way he was treated. And he talks about his scars and his lashes and his imprisonment. Like he again, most unhumble guy, right? But he talks about it and he tells him like, I've gone through it. You guys better listen to me.
Yeah. All the way to the old age of I think 40, 50s, right? And
hey.
Well, at the time, right? To reach that age. And I think, he was shipwrecked, he was bit by a snake, he was beat up almost, to death. He was jailed or he was in prison and he just kept going. He just found strength within God.
That's it.
Yeah.
To continue to move forward. And he said, you know what? I'm not done yet. I'm still alive. So I'm gonna keep going.
He actually says that in one verse. He says, I yearn to see my God. I yearn to see my God, but
to live is Christ, to die is gain.
Yeah. It was nuts, right? Yeah. So I hope that everybody listening can take a little bit of that and try and be a little bit more like Paul today. Be out there talking to people, be out there, not being afraid of what the backlash is going to be and, do it because God has been good to you and
just know he got you. He got you.
That's
too,
it. That's it. So thanks guys. Appreciate your time. This has been a lot of fun and looking forward to the next one. See you next time.
See you guys
later.